I need you to stop what you are doing, because what I am about to lay out is not speculation, not a theory, and not a casual read of the headlines. It's an attempt to deconstruct a warning of a global economic shockwave, a warning built on a foundation that may be cracking in real time. Donald Trump has issued a trillion-dollar warning, claiming his policies single-handedly saved the world from disaster and that now that disaster is imminent. He portrays a world on the brink, pushed there by policies he says are reversing his fix. Even the International Monetary Fund has warned of a non-negligible risk of a trillion-dollar hit to global output, stemming directly from political instability and erratic trade policies. But is this a genuine economic prophecy or the biggest bluff in political history? In this video, we are going to separate the facts from the fiction. We will dig into the numbers on trade, debt, and inflation to uncover what this trillion-dollar warning really means for you, for the United States, and for the world. If you care about what happens next, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because understanding this is critical. So what is the core of this warning that Donald Trump says will shock the world? At its heart is a simple, powerful idea. The United States is the economic engine of the planet. During a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump was explicit that the health of the U.S. economy dictates global stability. A slowdown in America, he warned, would send shockwaves across global markets. This isn't a particularly controversial idea. The U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar form the bedrock of the global financial system. When America gets a cold, the rest of the world often gets the flu. But Trump's diagnosis of why the U.S. economy is supposedly vulnerable is where things get contentious. He points to what he calls a toxic cocktail of excessive government spending, unchecked mass migration, and, above all, endless foreign imports. In his view, these imports fueled the largest trade deficit in history, a gap he claims was costing the nation over $1 trillion a year. This trade deficit is the villain in his story. He portrays it as a massive annual transfer of American wealth to other countries, particularly China. It is a narrative of jobs being offshored, factories being closed, and the American heartland being hollowed out. And this is where he makes his most audacious claim. He asserts that through his aggressive use of tariffs, he single-handedly solved this problem, slashing that massive trade deficit by a jaw-dropping figure in just 1 year, all without sparking the inflation his critics predicted. This supposed fix, he argues, is the only thing that was holding the line against a worldwide market disaster. And now, he warns, that line is about to break. The central thesis of his warning is that the policies that reversed his own are reigniting these old problems, pushing the global system toward a catastrophic failure. The warning is not just about numbers on a screen. It's about a fundamental clash of economic worldviews. But to understand if the warning is credible, we first have to examine the stunning claim at its foundation. Did he really fix America's trillion-dollar trade problem? The claim is a powerful one. A massive reduction in the U.S. trade deficit, seemingly overnight. It's the kind of headline number that grabs attention. But what if everything you've been told about this fix is wrong? When we dig into the official data, a very different and far more complex picture emerges. The dramatic drop in the trade deficit was based on the numbers for a single, anomalous month, October 2025. In that month, the goods deficit did indeed fall sharply to just under $30 billion. It was an impressive figure, the lowest it had been in years, and it was presented as definitive proof that the tariff strategy was working exactly as planned. However, looking at 1 month of economic data is like judging a movie by a single frame. It doesn't tell you the whole story, and in this case, the very next frame changed the narrative completely. Just 1 month later, in November 2025, the trade deficit didn't just normalize, it exploded. It widened sharply to $56.8 billion, a nearly 95% increase from the previous month. That single month of a low deficit wasn't a new trend. It was a statistical blip, likely caused by businesses front-loading orders to get ahead of shifting tariff deadlines. To get a true sense of the trend, we have to zoom out. And when we do that, the claim of a historic deficit reduction completely falls apart. In fact, during his prior term in office, the overall annual trade deficit in goods and services actually grew significantly, from around $481 billion in 2016 to nearly $679 billion by 2020. That's a 41% increase. Even looking at the most recent data available for 2025, The year-to-date goods deficit through November widened to $1.15 trillion, up from $806 billion over the same period in the prior year. The numbers are clear. Despite the aggressive tariff policies, the fundamental imbalance of the U.S. buying more from the world than it sells has not been reversed. The foundational claim of the trillion-dollar warning that Trump had already fixed the trade deficit is not supported by the broader data. The miraculous cut was an illusion created by cherry-picking a single month's statistics. This raises serious questions because if the primary tool used to fix this issue didn't work as advertised, what does that say about the tool itself? If the trade deficit wasn't truly fixed, what about the tool that was supposed to fix it? Tariffs. This is the centerpiece of the economic strategy, the crowbar intended to pry open foreign markets. The logic is straightforward. Make foreign goods more expensive to encourage buying American. This wasn't a subtle policy. The administration imposed the broadest and steepest tariffs the U.S. has seen in over a century. This included massive tariffs on goods from China, but also on allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, hitting everything from steel to cars. It involved using trade as a geopolitical weapon, for instance, in disputes with nations over their purchasing of Russian oil. The intended result was to rebalance trade. The actual result, however, has been a cascade of unintended consequences that fuel the very global instability Trump warns about. First, there's inflation. The administration claims its policies brought inflation down, but many economists argue tariffs, by their very nature, are inflationary. They are a tax paid by U.S. importers, who then pass the cost to consumers. Multiple studies, including from the St. Louis Fed and the National Bureau of Economic Research, have concluded that these tariffs added measurable upward pressure on the overall inflation rate. With the latest consumer price index still running at 2.7%, above the Federal Reserve's 2% target, any policy that adds pressure on prices is a major concern. Second, these tariffs trigger retaliation and create massive uncertainty. A trade war with Canada and Mexico was sparked. The ongoing conflict with China escalated. Tensions with the European Union flared up. This constant state of friction disrupts supply chains built over decades. This uncertainty acts like a brake on the global economy, making companies hesitant to invest and hire. The IMF specifically cited this kind of erratic trade policy as a key driver of global financial instability. Finally, who actually pays? The cost is paid by the American companies that import the goods. According to the Tax Foundation, these tariffs amount to one of the largest tax increases in recent decades, costing the average American household an estimated $1,300 in 2026. While the goal was to punish foreign competitors, a significant part of the economic pain is being felt right here at home. The tariff gambit, designed as the solution, has instead become a source of agitation itself. This is a really complex picture. Do you believe tariffs are the right tool, or do they cause more problems than they solve? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this valuable, a quick tap on the like button really helps support the channel. While the debate over tariffs grabs the headlines, there is a much larger, quieter threat lurking beneath the surface. It's the anchor dragging on long-term growth and the single biggest reason a shock to the American system could be so catastrophic: the national debt. The numbers are difficult to comprehend. As of early 2026, the U.S. national debt stands at over $38 trillion. The debt is now roughly 143% of the nation's entire annual economic output, or GDP, a dramatic increase from 2008, when the ratio was closer to 40%. The trajectory is even more alarming. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, projects that on its current path, the debt-to-GDP ratio will hit 183% by 2054. This mountain of debt has very real consequences. To finance its spending, the government has to pay interest. As the debt has grown and interest rates have risen, those payments have exploded. They have tripled since 2021 and are on track to cross $1 trillion per year. Think about that. $1 trillion. That's more than the entire defense budget. It's money that cannot be used for research, infrastructure, or tax relief. It is simply the cost of servicing past borrowing. This brings us to another one of the core claims, that the Trump administration had this under control. However, much like the trade deficit claim, this is not supported by a wider view of the data. Official figures show federal spending and budget deficits actually rose during this period. For the first quarter of fiscal year 2026 alone, the cumulative deficit was $601 billion. Furthermore, major policy initiatives like the tax cuts are projected by the CBO to add trillions more to the national debt. We are in a situation economists call a fiscal gap, a permanent, structural imbalance between spending and revenue. This colossal debt is the critical context for the trillion-dollar warning. It leaves the U.S. economy incredibly fragile. It limits the government's ability to respond to a future crisis. And it makes the entire global financial system, which is built on the foundation of U.S. government bonds being the safest asset in the world, increasingly vulnerable. So, we have a disputed narrative on trade, a fierce debate over tariffs, and a national debt spiraling to unprecedented levels. Given all this, you might expect gloomy forecasts. And yet, if you listen to administration officials, they are predicting a massive, roaring economic boom. This brings us to the tale of two economies. First, the optimistic view. Senior officials like Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick have made bold predictions, forecasting that the U.S. economy will exceed 5% growth in the first quarter of 2026 and could even hit 6%. Their reasoning is based on aggressive interest rate cuts and the effects of a new tax and spending law. This isn't just wishful thinking. The Atlanta Fed's GDP Now tracker has projected similarly high growth, lending some credibility to the boom scenario. But then there is the other America, the one that doesn't show up in the headline GDP numbers. Wall Street and independent economists are far more skeptical, with a consensus forecast for modest growth in the range of 2 to 2.5%. The International Monetary Fund is even more subdued. But more importantly, there's the view from Main Street. While officials talk about a boom, a staggering 64% of people disapprove of the handling of the cost of living. The reason for this disconnect is simple: inflation. While the overall rate has come down, prices for groceries, gas, and housing remain painfully high. This reveals a deep inequality. Much of the headline growth is being driven by the wealthiest 10% of households. Meanwhile, lower and middle-income families have seen their savings eroded. This creates a fragile situation where the economy looks strong on paper, but a huge portion of the population is falling behind. This disconnect leads experts to worry about a nightmare scenario known as stagflation, a toxic mix of a stagnating economy and high inflation. It's the worst of both worlds, and it's a real risk when you have policies that could both restrict supply, like tariffs, while simultaneously trying to boost demand through tax cuts. This is the tale of two economies, an official narrative of a historic boom, and the lived reality of anxiety and financial pressure for millions. This brings us back to where we started, the trillion-dollar warning. With all these conflicting signals, is a global market disaster inevitable? The truth is, the U.S. economy is the engine of the world. The core of the warning isn't necessarily about a single policy. It's about the accumulation of risk and the erosion of stability. When you synthesize all the arguments, three primary risk factors for 2026 become clear. First, policy uncertainty. The aggressive and unpredictable use of tariffs creates a deeply unstable environment. When global companies can't be sure what rules will apply next month, they hit pause. They delay investment and hiring. This chilling effect is a powerful drag on economic growth. Second, we face a series of fiscal deadlines. The political calendar is littered with tripwires, decisions on extending tax policies, funding infrastructure, and addressing the looming insolvency of programs like Social Security. The Supreme Court is also expected to rule on the legality of using emergency powers for tariffs. Each deadline represents a point of potential crisis and extreme political conflict. Finally, there is the White's Federal Reserve's dilemma. The central bank is caught between a rock and a hard place. If it cuts interest rates, it risks pouring fuel on inflation. If it keeps rates high to fight inflation, it risks tipping the economy into recession. A single misstep could have dramatic consequences. So while Donald Trump's diagnosis and his claims about his own solutions are heavily disputed and based on misleading data, the underlying vulnerability he points to is very real. The global system is interconnected, and its foundation, the U.S. economy, is laden with an unprecedented amount of debt and is being subjected to radical policy experiments. The real trillion-dollar shockwave may not be a sudden crash like 2008. Instead, it could be a slow, grinding process, a long period of stagflation where prices keep rising but the economy goes nowhere. A period of persistent uncertainty that erodes confidence and slowly lowers the standard of living, not just in America, but around the world. The warning has been issued. The question is whether anyone has a credible plan to stop it. So where does this leave us? We started with a stark warning, underpinned by the claim of having fixed America's trillion-dollar trade deficit. As we've uncovered, the data tells a more complicated story. The claim of a massive deficit cut was built on a single month of data, while annual figures show the problem has persisted. The primary tool, tariffs, is highly controversial, potentially increasing costs for consumers and creating global instability. And underneath it all lies the staggering national debt, making the entire system more fragile. The optimistic forecasts of a boom stand in sharp contrast to the pessimism of consumers and independent economists. In the end, the true trillion-dollar warning might not be about a single policy. It may be about the dangerous combination of extreme debt, radical policy uncertainty, and deep political division. The shockwave to the global system may not be a sudden, explosive event, but a slow, corrosive decay of the stability that has underpinned the world economy for decades. But what do you think is the biggest threat to the economy right now? Is it the trade deficit, the national debt, inflation, or something else? I want to hear your perspective in the comments section below. If you want to keep making sense of these complex economic stories, make sure you're subscribed and have hit that notification bell. And for another investigation into the forces shaping our world, check out the video on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.